Okay, great. Hello. Today and tomorrow we have Karthik Vijay joining us as a bit of a guest lecturer. He has very kindly volunteered his time to come and share some insights and teach some stuff tomorrow. So that'd be amazing. So we have 4 sessions. This one's a bit of an intro, and get to know Karthik and see what he's been up to. Um, this afternoon, we have a fireside chat. So, Karthik and I are going to have a bit of a conversation about thoughts about joining the tech industry and some of his experience mentoring juniors and things like that. And tomorrow, there is 2 sessions, intro to AWS, Y Cloud, part 1 and 2. So if you want to learn a bit more about AWS and get a good overview, join us for that. I'm going to share a Slido link. At any stage, feel free to ask questions on Slido in the Google Meet chat or raise your hand. Any bigger questions we might keep for the fireside chat later this afternoon. And yeah, looking forward to everything we're going to be hearing. I've had a good few chats with Karthik over the last few weeks, and I've been looking forward to all of you getting to hear from him. So yeah, thank you so much for joining us, Karthik. We really appreciate it. I'll hand the floor to you.
Oh, thanks, Kim. Appreciate it. Hi. So my name is Karthik Vijay. I currently work for BNZ. So I've been with them as a permanent employee for the last like 2.5 years. So and before that, 6 years as a contractor with them. How this came about is so BNZ has um, 2 volunteer days per year, and so people are welcome to sort of volunteer in any industry or anything they prefer. And I mentioned to Lance and Kimberly the other day that I'm too lazy to go around and clean graffitis on the walls and stuff. So I figured this could be a better way of how I can sort of volunteer and contribute to the industry. Yeah, so I reached out to the institute a few months ago, and they were quite happy to have me, and my manager was very pleased as well. And this is not going to be in any way, shape, or form a recruitment tool for BNZ. Apart from my manager, nobody knows that I'm here, and nobody really cares about. So yeah. Um, and of course, please feel free to stop me. I've got quite a few things to talk about, and we may not be able to get through all of those during the session. We might save some for the afternoon session or for tomorrow. But please feel free to stop me at any point in time and ask me questions. Yeah, cool. Right.
You just muted yourself. You just went on mute after your lovely intro. Tis the demoitis that gets all of us.
I think what happened was my mouse cursor was
I was
on
about to
the
say,
mute
did you
button.
elbow the space
And
bar?
exactly. Cool. Just a bit of a disclaimer that like everything that I talk about in the next couple of sessions is just my personal use and not that of BNZ's or Developers Institute and whatnot.
It muted again. I think my computer's been talking to your computer.
Obviously, I don't do this very often to be very professional. And, yeah, sorry about that. Cool. Let's see. Cool. So in this session, I was hoping we could talk about so these things, so sort of what are the common dev jobs, what career path, uh, what different career paths are available to you as students, what types of interviews you're likely to encounter, and generally, like say, how can you stand out when you apply for jobs and whatnot. So yeah. So I've listed some of the common dev jobs that are available in the market at this point in time, and these sort of change over time. Some of these jobs did not exist when I first started out, and some of these jobs, like, only came about the last couple of years ago, and there will likely be like more changes by the time we finish. Who knows? But so the first job that I can think of is one of a front-end developer, and you probably know what this already means. This predominantly is sort of some sort of JavaScript framework like React, Redux, Angular, Vue.js, and whatnot. So until like 5-6 years ago, this wasn't really an advertised position. Like, everybody was expected to do everything, but like, people have realized the front end is quite a specialized area now, and the frameworks are quite sort of evolving very fast in the front end space. So so that's a job. Back end developer. So that's sort of predominantly what I've been doing over the last 20 years. So I've done a bit of front end, but mostly sort of back end development. So this involves like writing APIs and any other backend tooling using like Java, Kotlin, .NET, C#, and those sort of tools. API developer is very similar to a backend developer, except it's sort of the focus is on developing what we call REST APIs. So we can talk about it in more detail a bit later. But so 2 and 3 are very similar, the backend and the API development. And this, you would have seen this sort of more frequently these days. A full stack developer, meaning you have to do front end, back end, and all of those. And this is getting more and more common these days. People expect you to do both front end and back end. I'm yet to come across anybody who's equally good at both front end and back end. So I would consider myself as a sort of a back end specialized all-rounder. So I can do both, but I specialize in the back end and the API space, if that makes sense. A user interface designer. So so this is sort of developing how your websites look like. And there's quite a few jobs out there for UX these days. An automation tester. So this is the reason I put a few asterisks on is this is sort of a highly underrated job, in my opinion. So as a developer, like, you are expected to know a whole lot of things, right? So and the frameworks and the tools and the standards that you learn will sort of like evolve over time, and you have to constantly learn. But if you find that quite challenging, so to keep yourself up to date, every year or so, this could be a good career path as an automation tester. So it is not as intense as a development job, but still gives you enough job satisfaction in terms of writing code and whatnot, and you get paid just just the same as a developer these days. But didn't used to be the case in the past. So an automation tester would not get paid as much as a developer in the past, but this has changed over the last 5-6 years or so. So that could be a good career path if you find the development jobs sort of quite intense as well. The integration developer. So this is sort of connecting, different pieces of applications together. Historically, this has been sort of user interface driven. So you buy a product from IBM or some other vendor who provides integration products, so you sort of configure the visual, the user interface, and sort of connect this, but more and more so, you can now develop your integration products using code. and which is also quite popular these days. So some tools like Apache Camel, like Spring integration comes to mind. So yeah, this could be another good career path. Data engineer is sort of more into data analytics and figuring out what the data means, interpreting data, and sort of big data and that sort of thing. DevOps engineer, this is roughly my current role, bit of DevOps and API development. So I work predominantly with AWS these days. So I'm in charge of setting up not only developing the APIs, but also developing the AWS infrastructure where the API is deployed. Yeah. And then you have the mobile developer. So you have the Android and the iOS developer as well. So yeah. Any questions on this? Cool. I'll move on. So I sort of laid out a few different career paths, that might be available in front of you, and these are by no means the only paths available. These are just things that I can think of and that I've seen in sort of companies around New Zealand. So the path one is sort of roughly the path that I'm on. It's sort of technically focused, and you start with being a grad developer, and then you go on to be an intermediate, senior, and a principal engineer and architect. And I quite like being technical and not. I don't really want to be sort of into people management. So that's path number two. If you're into people management, so once you become a senior or lead dev, you could go on to become an engineering manager and sort of head of engineering and whatnot. So that is, to me, is a fair bit of people responsibility, not necessarily so much of technical responsibility, because as an engineering manager, you would delegate your technical decisions to your architects and your principal engineers, but it's more of a it's more of a sort of a people management and rather maybe a bit of political role. If that makes sense. The path three, which is sort of a product focus, and this is again one of these new roles that have come up in the last a couple of years. So you become you start off as a dev, and maybe then you want to become a technical product owner. So you're in charge of developing whatever product that you're in charge of, and these roles could be either technical in nature or very sort of product focused. So, for example, at BNZ we have a product owner for AWS, which is very technical. We also have product owners for like cards and payments, credit card, loans and term deposits and whatnot. So they're more of a product focus, if you know what I mean. So, but you can still be relatively technical and be a product owner, and like in the cloud space and other like containers and whatnot. So yeah, so that's path three. Path four. So that I was on path four for a very long time, and so in my 20 years of time in IT, most of my time has been like in contracting space. So the reason why I've got the contracting is after becoming an intermediate dev is simply because the contracting market expects you to have a certain level of expertise, which you can't really get like in 1 or 2 years of starting out. So hence I would not rush to go contracting, if you know what I mean. So I would have at least a good 3 or 4 years of experience as a developer and then go contracting. And then I've got one more, I think. Yeah, so Path 5 is sort of, if you've got a really good idea, you build your own product and sort of you sell your product that way. So yeah. Any questions? Cool. Let's see. So in terms of the types of, like, there's various ways people interview, and the most common that I've seen is a conversational style interview. It's typically about 45 minutes to an hour, depending on the kind of job you apply. And they just ask you questions about what sort of experience do you bring in, and what do you know, what do you not know, and sort of those sort of questions. I find them quite easy to do myself. So this is my preferred way of interviewing people. And there's also coding interviews, which that can be quite challenging depending on the kind of problems you expected to solve, and especially within limited timeframes. So if you are expected, if you're asked to do coding interviews, I would suggest that you go through something like LeetCode. I'll provide this presentation to you so you can follow the links. So each of these are links, so you can click on and sort of go on to what that website is all about. So LeetCode is something that's very common, and you also expected to know a lot of data structures and algorithms. So this may not be the case like when you first start out as a straight out of your finishing your course, but as you mature and you become more and more senior, you expected to know like data structures and algorithms, and how to make your code run fast, and that sort of thing. So some companies, instead of doing coding interviews, they let you they give you a problem, and they say you can take this problem home and solve the problem and submit, maybe like through GitHub or GitLab or whatever. So that's also quite common. So pair programming is something that we used to do at BNZ. So when we interview people, we assign them a buddy. We give them a problem, we assign them a buddy, and they can ask their buddy whatever questions they want, and based on the problem. And so the buddy's there to help them out, answer those questions, and so help them guide through the problem. We've stopped doing it for whatever reason, but this used to be the predominant our interview style until 5 years ago. So this the Silicon Valley style. So I used to work in America for good 3 or 4 years, and I've been in interviews for all day, 8 hours, and those I found them very challenging. I was sort of very physically and emotionally drained by the end of the day, and it's not something for me. And I'm really glad we don't do these sort of interviews in New Zealand. I hate them. But if you're applying for a remote job, for example, you might be you might encounter these sort of interviews as well. So yeah, and so with these sort of 1 to 3 day interviews, the LeetCode and the data structures and algorithms, they are a crucial part. They give you multiple problems to solve, and you expect it to write code that performs the best, and whatnot. And typically, most problems they give you, you can't really solve the problem in the given time period they give you. It's all about them trying to understand whether you understood the problem, and what are the steps you're taking to solve the problem, as opposed to what is the finished product. If you know what I mean. Cool. And there's a few standard non-technical questions people ask. This is a very common question. How do you resolve conflicts with another developer? If I had $1 for every time this question was asked to me, I would be richer than the bank that I work for. It's so common, I was whining about this question to my partner the other day, and our little girl, she's only 7 years old, and she overheard me whining about it, and she was like, I know how I would resolve conflicts with somebody. I'll just kick them in the nuts. That's what she said. And, unfortunately, I can't do that in the workspace. So yeah. What are your strengths, and where do you see yourself in a few years' time? And the objective of these questions is not necessarily find out, like, there's no right or wrong answers, except for maybe question number one. Typically, interviewers ask these questions to just figure out how you communicate. So it's less about the answer and more about, can you actually talk, and can you look people in the eye, and sort of how's your communication skills and whatnot. So, any questions? Cool. I'll keep going. Yeah, so in terms of especially when you start out, how can you stand out? Because coming from a place like India, I've had to fight for everything in my life, right? So in terms of going to university and going to, finding a job, there's 1.2 billion people, and everybody wants to be a computer engineer or a doctor or whatnot, right? So so I've had to struggle quite a bit in terms of the amount of effort that I put in on things. So this is just based on my experience, and this may or may not apply to in New Zealand. So I don't do this. I don't write a technical blog. I've been thinking about it for a while, but I haven't written one yet. But this could be a very valuable sort of tool in your arsenal, especially as you're starting out. So as you learn, it could be something very trivial, let's say you learn JavaScript, and you've learned to write different types of for loops, for example, and you could write a blog about it, and over time you'll keep getting better, and your blogs will get increasingly complex. And when you apply for jobs, you can have your blog listed on your CV, and that really helps you stand out amongst other candidates. And if you sort of keep it as a habit, you write a few blog posts every month or so, and over time, over a couple of years, you'll have quite a good variety of technical articles under your name, and they'll really help you stand out, in my opinion. A few ways you can write your tech blog. So Medium is a very common blogging platform. Hashnode is something quite new, and I've been thinking about using Hashnode. To be honest, I quite like the platform. Or you could install WordPress and write your own blog, and there might be other blogging platforms as well, but these are the ones that I can think of off the top of my head. And as you write your blog posts, so I think you should consider publishing your code to something like GitHub or GitLab or one of those code repositories, and you can link your blog post to these online repositories, so people can download your code and run the code. YouTube videos, that's obviously very popular these days. So if you're brave enough, you could start a YouTube video, And again, it does not have to be anything fancy. It could be as simple as writing a few for loops. And a lot of people, yeah, the number of things I've learned, simple things I've learned on YouTube, yes, that's a lot. You could also contribute to open source projects. This could obviously be, quite time consuming. You have to understand the source code. It is not for everybody, but that's again something that employers really, really appreciate, that you can contribute to open source community. Certifications. So yeah, and those are certifications can be a really good way to stand out as well. For me, I sort of force myself to do certifications, especially as I'm learning something new, and I want to motivate myself to learn whatever it is that I'm learning. For example, up until 3 years ago, I did not know any AWS or Azure or I did not have any cloud skills, and I'm generally quite lazy. And but I was like, okay, if I set myself a target of I'm gonna do, this AWS certification by the end of the year, and so that sort of gives me a bit of motivation to learn, so that and so I started out that way, and that's. And employers really appreciate you putting in the effort to learn, and these some of these certifications can be quite challenging. It's not something you can learn in a day and sit the exam. Each of the certifications that I've done over the years, like, they've taken at least 2 months of preparation, if not more. So, but that's something that could be quite valuable. Any questions? And can people still hear me okay?
Yeah, you're good. We're just enthralled by all this highly valuable knowledge. Keep going.
All right. Yes, we already talked about it. So the other good thing about certifications is, so there is a lot of recruitment companies these days, and most of the jobs get advertised through recruitment companies, whereas some jobs the employer, BNZ, I don't think we hire a recruitment company for permanent staff, but for contracting we do. But and the people you might be dealing with, they're not necessarily technical people. So these certifications really help you stand out among non-technical people. When it comes to interviewing, I've interviewed like dozens of candidates over the years. I don't really care, because I know the questions I want to ask, and I know the skills that are required for my team. So I personally don't care for certifications, but to help you get through the front gate, this might help you a bit. So in my case, BNZ pays for any learning that I do. So all of my exams are free, and over time it adds up. So each of my exams that I've done costs at least $500. So if you've done 6 or 7 of those, so it quickly adds up. Udemy, I did not know about Udemy until a few years ago. It is a fantastic source for preparing for certifications. Most courses on Udemy are about sort of $10 to $20. It's a fantastic source. So one trick with Udemy is, so if you go into Udemy now and search for, let's say, an AWS exam, they'll tell you it's like $99, right? But if you just get out of it and go in maybe a few hours later, it'd be like, oh, this is an exclusive sale for you for $10, right? The course is just as good, but it's just the way that they market. So they try to make as much money off you as possible. So I would say, please don't spend any more than $20 on a Udemy course. Cool. And so in terms of who you could potentially work for, so I've listed a few potential options. So startups. So these are some of the characteristics that I've observed. I've personally not worked for a startup, but I've known people who work for startups, and some of them have been incredibly successful. So you typically have to work long hours, but your learning is sort of out of this world, because startups typically don't have a lot of money, so you end up doing a lot of things that you typically would not experience in a larger company. Like, for example, I work for a bank now, and my role is defined, so that's all I do, and I'm not in charge of things outside of my role. So whereas in a startup, you have to be an all-rounder, so you have to know and do a lot of different things, and especially as you're starting out, this could be a very good exercise for you to experience and learn different things. But I acknowledge it's not for everybody. It can be quite cutthroat. Yeah, and you could lose your job, and amongst other things. Yeah. Small to mid-sized companies, you still get to learn a lot. Probably not to the same extent as a startup, and generally there's less bureaucracy, and the pay is average. Yeah, so I've worked for a few small companies. Like, when I say small, anywhere between 5 to 15 people all in all. So I quite like working for smaller companies. Please don't tell BNZ that, but it's you get to know everybody in your company, and sort of it's more of an extended family, if you will, in a small company. But yeah, but depending on the company, you may not get paid as much. Larger companies, you definitely have the option of moving between different roles. So, for example, some of the career path that I laid out. So you can be a dev one day, and then 6 months later, you can be a product owner or an engineering manager, and this and that. So you definitely have the option and room to move to different roles, and potentially even different job locations, and sometimes, depending on the company, even other countries. And like reasonably good pay, good benefits. So I have unlimited sick leave at BNZ from memory. I hope they haven't taken it away, but yeah. But this is a defining characteristic of a large company, right? The bureaucracy. So yeah, things depend as the size of the company grows, and there's been like heaps of studies done, over the last 50 years. As the size of the company grows, the bureaucracy increases, and it'll get increasingly harder to get your job done. But eventually, you will get the job done, but just it'll get progressively harder, and that there's no there's no way to get around it. Unfortunately, that's the state of affairs. Restructuring. So larger companies tend to do a fair bit of restructuring. Every now and then a new person comes in, a new CTO or CEO or chief information officer, and they have different ideas because they've just done something somewhere else and they think that worked. So they bring those ideas into the new company that they've joined, and as a result, there's restructures and whatnot. So yeah. Cool. Consulting companies. So when I talk about consulting companies, I'm talking about without naming companies. So a body shop, if that's still a term that people use. Your company lends you to other companies. So, for example, if I work for a consulting company, one day I could work for BNZ, the next day I could work for ANZ, for example. So when I first started out in India, I worked for a consulting company, and I have to say it was very challenging. I moved in the 3 years that I was there. I moved between 4 or 5 different clients. Yeah. So one good thing about working for a consulting company is you get to learn heaps as you go through different clients, and different clients use different set of technologies, tools. So you do get to learn heaps. You have to interview at every client, so nobody, just because you work for a consulting company, the you know uh, the bank's not going to say, oh, you work for this company already, so we'll just hire you in. So you do have to interview at every client that you work, and that can be quite challenging. And in terms of reporting lines, so you have a manager at your consulting company, and you also have a manager at your client. So you have two sets of people to report to, and that's not for everybody, and it's certainly not for me. Having one manager is bad enough. Having two is not for me. So like if you want to go for holiday, you have to ask two people and this and that. So you have to fill two sets of timesheets, one for your client and one for your consulting company and all that. This is something, number 4 is something that has happened to me. My company oversold me somewhere with a client, and the expectation was so high. And I was just starting out. I was fresh out of university. I didn't know jack shit, right? And I had to sort of come up to speed very quick, and it was a bit stressful. But eventually, I managed. But when you're first starting out, it's just it adds a lot of pressure on you that you don't necessarily need, in my opinion. Again, the number 5 has happened to me. Not all the clients are nice, especially if your company had oversold you, and the expectations are high, and you expect to deliver, and if you continuously slip meeting targets, people are not going to be nice to you. So final thoughts. And so the point number 1 that I'm trying to make is, so it could be one of two things. So you could either be a jack of all trades, which sort of is what I am. So I can work on a wide variety of things. So I can do front end, back end, mobile development, integration, automation, testing, and this and that. So you could do that, or you could consider specializing in a certain area, like for example, AWS or front end or back end. And looking back at my career, I don't think I don't think I have achieved much by being an all-rounder, and certainly the industry is moving towards a specialization. So so there's targeted teams for every every technology. For example, at BNZ, there is a team that does only AWS, right? So I can do both AWS and Azure, right? They don't need that, right? And just because I know both, I don't necessarily get paid extra because I know both, if that makes sense. So why would I spend a lot of time and effort learning both when I can sort of specialize in one of those technologies and still get paid the same and still have decent job opportunities? So it's not that if you specialize, you will have fewer job opportunities. In fact, I would say my interviews, like when I get interviewed, my interviews are getting progressively harder as I have more and more stuff on my CV. And some people want to ask me front-end questions, some people want to ask me Kafka questions, and I can't, especially as I'm getting older, I can't remember every little thing that I've done. And so it's hasn't necessarily made me any more money than otherwise, if that makes sense. So, and hence my recommendation would be, if you want to continue as a developer, you should consider specializing in something rather than sort of, trying to be good at everything, every little tool and framework. Networking is quite important in this industry. A lot of jobs I've done over the years as a contractor, those jobs were not even advertised. So I just knew those jobs through my friends and and people that I've met during meetups and whatnot. So I would say that if there's any meetup groups that are available in your area, or that can be even remote these days, I would encourage you to attend those meetups and sort of network. And the tech block idea, I think that's that could be very, very valuable in your career. And number 4 is again something that I've observed over the years. So if you stay in the company for too long, you compare staying in the company versus changing jobs every few years. So if you stay in the company, you're at best you're going to get maybe 3 to 5% pay increase every year, or sometimes even less. Sometimes you don't get any pay increase at all. Whereas if you, especially as you're starting out, if you move between jobs every 2 to 3 years, that could really help boost your income. And eventually, like as you get more experience, you could decide, oh, this is too much for me. I don't want to jump every couple of years. I could just be I could just focus on getting better and improving my career in the same organization. So you could decide to do that. But initially, I would say that every 2 to 3 years, if you make the jump, you're likely to get a bigger pay raise. Yeah, I think that's pretty much all I had.
Amazing. Thank you, Karthik. I just want to second everything you said. That was really pertinent advice for everyone, and I really appreciate it. I am aware we have gone over time. We do have a question, but I think I might put that in the fireside chat this afternoon. I know everyone has class soon. So I just wanted to reshare the Slido. I'm collecting questions all day to ask Karthik this afternoon. So anything you've thought of that Karthik's shared and you want to know more, please chuck it in the Slido, or you could message me if you wanted, and we'll talk about it this afternoon when we have a bit more time. And as I said at the start, we've got this sort of informal interview style chat this afternoon, and then 2 educational sessions on AWS. So I hope everybody will join us. Did you have any last thing to say, Karthik, before I send everyone off to class?
No, thank you for patiently listening to all my rants. Really appreciate it.
Fantastic. All right. Thank you, everyone. I will stop this recording and hopefully see you all this afternoon and tomorrow. Thank you for joining us, Karthik. That was amazing.
Okay.
Bye, everyone.